These journal ecosystem videos have been all over my YouTube home feed, so I thought I'd jump in on the trend and share with you my 2026 journal ecosystem. This is a big year for me because I have been a paper planner before, I have been a digital planner before, and this is the first year that I feel like both of those systems are working together in harmony, and I feel like I have a holistic, calm, organized personal productivity system. Let's jump into my 2026 journal ecosystem, including why this guy is already failing and what I'm gonna do to fix him. Tap down camera. All right, this is my current journal stack as it stands. And let's start with this little guy right here. This one's probably the easiest to explain. This is a Hobonichi Techo original size, which is an A6 size, and it's pretty tiny. I am using this one as my catch-all on-the-go notebook. And I use this to just capture random things on the go. Whenever I go out, I like to have a little notebook with me. And since I have such a vast notebook collection, I pretty much just grab any of the little notebooks that are around. But this year I'm trying to make a concerted effort to streamline the notebooks that I'm using and try to stay to just these three. That way, whenever there's a piece of information I need, I know where to find it. And I also need it to seamlessly integrate in with my Notion system. So I like having just 3 dedicated books. Right now, when I write something random, I leave it open next to my computer, and that's how I make sure that it gets into my Notion system. But this is a little bit more systematic, so I am going to be using this as my on-the-go notebook. Since it's only been about a week or so, I only have one thing here that I've written, but eventually this book will look something like this, where I have just random pieces of information. Sometimes I use it for random notes or little things that I need on the go. This will also be replacing the notebook that I have hanging out next to my computer. Whenever I am on my computer, I also have a notebook to jot down random things. So I'll be able to keep this next to my computer as well as take it with me on the go. I am gonna put a plastic cover on this. This is a special cover. It is made by Liberty Fabrics, so there's a little bit of information there. And there are these beautiful pink and blue flowers, which are my favorite colors. And then there's some green leaves. I think that this is a beautiful cover, and I hope that this is the first year that I'm actually going to finish one of these Hobonichis. More on that later. That is my catch-all and on-the-go notebook. This next notebook is an A5 Scribbles That Matter notebook. This notebook is super old. It's been in my collection for a really long time, so I was really happy to have a specific use case for it. This year, it is my second year that I'm learning Japanese. I took my first formal Japanese class in the fall, so I am now in my second semester, and I do take a lot of notes here on my Genki textbook, but I'm finding that I want to have some reference pages, and I also want to have some additional ways of studying vocabulary. Most of the time that I'm studying Japanese on the go, I'm using my Anki app. Anki is a digital space repetition flashcard app that I have both on my computer and on my phone. So I usually use that, but I've been finding that I also like having physical flashcards. So these are N5 flashcards, which is the lowest level of Japanese proficiency. And I have these individual cards. When I went to Japan, I also purchased these little cards. Now you can get these tiny cards with this ring on JetPens. I'll leave a link to them down below, but they're so expensive, comparatively speaking. This was 143 yen, which was roughly, I'll leave the conversion over here, but it was very inexpensive. And I can make these flashcards into the verbs that I'm learning or any of the vocabulary that I'm learning. This is one of the ways that I'm doing a combination of digital and analog this year. So I have this notebook as my centralized Japanese learning notebook. I only started it this week since the year has just started. So I've written out some of the vocabulary that I'm working on. I have also started to write out some structure for sentences. And when I'm in class, now I'm taking class notes. So I anticipate that my class notes are going to not be as aesthetically pleasing or perfect as the things that I do before class and as I'm preparing for class, but I do have a centralized location now to document all of the notes that I have in class. I'm finding this really handy so far, and since it's not that big, it's an A5 size, and I tend to carry decently sized bags, I find that this is pretty easy for me to take on the go. And I find that when I reach for my on the go notebook, I also grab this one and just throw it in my bag. And that's been really helpful so far. It's been helping me create analog moments as I go out through my day, which is one of the things that I'm trying to work on for 2026, is trying to get offline and away from screens whenever possible, since my job here on YouTube does require me to be in front of a screen for so long. And my regular 9 to 5 also requires me to be in front of a screen for so long. So these are creating little moments where I don't have to look at a screen, but I'm still working toward my language learning goals, or I'm documenting things that I would otherwise put into my Notion system. Finally, we come to my actual planner and journal. This is a recycled leather, I don't know what that means, cover that I got from Paper Source. This is housing my Hobonichi Cousin. And as you can see, it is pretty empty because the year has just started. And yet, I have already failed at maintaining this Hobonichi. I started it the second week of January. I usually give myself about a week before I fully move into a new system. And when I started using it as a place to journal, a place for me to write my top 3 events or top 3 tasks that I have for the day, as well as the space for me to just write notes and really treat this a little bit like a daily log within a bullet journal, as well as a space for journaling at the end of the day. I wanted this to do all things. And I knew from the beginning that there are things in the Hobonichi Cousin that don't work for me. For starters, I don't necessarily always need a page. Sometimes I need a half page. Sometimes I need 2 or 3 pages, depending on what's going on. Especially when I'm journaling, when I take the time to do long form journaling, I don't want to do that in a separate place. Sometimes it's too much, sometimes it's too little. Secondly, I know after years of trial and error that this size of grid is too small for my handwriting. It's uncomfortable for me to write this small. Usually, this is my usual handwriting size. So you can see that my handwriting size is much bigger than this. But every year, without fail, I will watch one of Helen from Coffee Monsters Co., one of her flip throughs, and I convinced myself that this is the year that the Hobonichi is going to work for me. But once I started doing 2 days of this, I thought that might not be the case this year. So, like the true behavioral scientist that I am, I went back to look at all the other years that I have bought a Hobonichi Cousin, and it's been almost every year since 2017. So let's take a look at some of my old Hobonichis. This is how I think it'll go. I'll have some daily highlights, maybe some to-dos in terms of my personal plans, a little journaling about what happened, and I also just have some random notes and stickers, and it looks beautiful. But this only happened February 2nd. Other days look like this. And if I'm gonna have things be this scattered, I might as well have them in a grid size that works for my handwriting. There have been times where I've used the Hobonichi like this, which is long form journaling. I'm sure that this is currently blurred out because I know that when I'm doing this kind of long form journaling, I'm usually pouring out some intense feelings or emotions. But even if I used it in that way, you'll see that I stopped using this completely by February 6th. So that met the fate of many New Year's resolutions done by the beginning of February. Now, there have been other times where I have been able to be consistent with using a Hobonichi for some time. And it's been when I've used it as a hybrid, almost bullet journal. Here I have things that I need to do during the week, and then I created a new section for Monday, for Tuesday, for Wednesday, and then here I have some journaling happening on that Thursday. Because I found that I was using the Hobonichi most frequently and consistently when I used it almost like a bullet journal, I thought that I would get a Sterling Ink Common Planner. That way I could just have pages in the back that I can fill in almost like a bullet journal. And at the very beginning, I can have my weekly overview. My weekly overview is one of my favorite things that I like to look back on, and that was one of the main reasons why I wanted to go back to a Hobonichi this year, because this still did not work for me. This has the same size grid that a Hobonichi has. So I have fixed the problem of not having a day on one page. I can do multiple pages or a half page, and this is also beautifully numbered and a nice soft gray. Yet I wasn't consistent with this because of the grid size. But this year, part of me was drawn back to these weekly spreads. I love doing these weekly spreads. I have mountains of stickers, many of which I acquired before 2019, and they're still just sitting here. So I wanted to grab the Hobonichi this year because I thought it would be really cool to get back into this weekly overview, this weekly planning with stickers and washi and sticker kits. And there is evidence for both a psychological and a productivity benefit in having a paper-based planning system, at least in addition to or to augment a digital planning system. So this is what I thought I would do, and this is what I was hoping for. From my very first Hobonichi, this is my Hobonichi from 2017, I was pretty good at staying consistent with the weekly overviews, and that is what I was going for. I also wanted to do more of that long form journaling. So this might be completely blurred out, but this is how I was using my journal in 2022. It was more of a long form journal, and I enjoyed this for some time. There were days when I did one page and not the other. This extra page here would bother me. So sadly, here is my graveyard for Hobonichi's past, which is why it was very interesting to me that I chose to go with a Hobonichi this year. But it's never too late to change your mind. After I gathered up all the evidence of what didn't work, I asked myself what actually did work, because I have been a paper planner pretty much my whole life, and I moved over to a hybrid system maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So I know that things have worked for me. So what has actually worked? Well, I have stacks and stacks of notebooks that are fully complete cover to cover. And if we can take a slight behavioral science break, because if not, is this even the productivity psychologist? If I would have developed a system for criterion-based decision making, I would have been able to find my perfect journal ecosystem much quicker. If I would have started by asking myself, what do I need in a journal, and then worked backwards from there, I would have been in a much better position. So what are the things that I need? One of the things that I am looking for is a few yearly overviews. So this has a really nice yearly overview that I can use as a tracking system. This is my goal for tracking for 2026. I have a few things that I want to track. I'm also tracking my weight, and I also want one line a day. So when I looked at this and developed this kind of system of what I want for 2026, it looked like this would be a good place to at least document some of these things that I'm trying to track. The one line a day I could potentially do somewhere else, including in the monthly overview. So I want to have multiple yearly views. I can use this potentially as a yearly view if there was something I was trying to track every year. So if I was going to track, say, if I felt positively neutral or negative about my relationship, I can use red, yellow, and green here as a little stamp in each of those days. I can track things longitudinally here, and I could also track a few things. I think there's 12 things that I can track, and I can just fill this with X's. I could also use this at the bottom for additional tracking, and then here in the monthly overview I can do the one line per day. So this situation that I would have here, I could potentially have here. And that was appealing to me because I need a yearly and a monthly. I also like how organized and neat this calendar looks compared to some of the calendars that I've handwritten in the past. So I enjoyed that. That was a plus. Then the big draw for the Hobonichi for me this year is that I wanted to use my stickers because I'm trying to actually work through the sticker kit. This is going to be the year of stickers for me, and I wanted to do that in the weekly overview. So I thought that would be a perfect utilization, and I do have evidence that I have been able to do that in the past. So that was another check mark for the Hobonichi. But we now have the same problem that I've always had with these pages in the back. I don't like that they are actually one page per day and they're not just open. I have learned to live with it. I'm not really bothered by the colors and the fact that those change, but I'm not a huge fan of them. And that's another reason why I went with the sterling ink a few years ago. It was 2024 when I moved over to the sterling ink because the back had just the notebook and the back had the gray grids rather than a continuously changing grid color. But both of these had the same problem with the actual size of the grid. So if I would have held steady to my criterion, I would have known that the Hobonichi is a very expensive mistake and that is not going to work out. Now the size of this is perfect for me. I really enjoy A5 size for my overall planner. I have sometimes been able to make this B6 size work, but it is squishing my handwriting again, and I want to minimize friction when I'm using my planner. I want to feel fully comfortable. So I have felt most fully comfortable in the past utilizing just plain old notebooks. Here's the evidence because all of these notebooks are fully completed from cover to cover. And they could potentially meet all of my requirements, but I have evidence of how I've met those requirements in these different notebooks. Starting with having multiple yearly views, I have been able to do a year in pixels in different areas of my life. I've also been able to have these quarterly presentations where it's 4 or 3 months at a time in a specific page. I've also done a 6-month overview before where I had 6 months on 2 pages. And finally, in one of my earliest bullet journals, I do have a full year on 1 page. So I know that I am able to do that and that it has been functional for me in the past. In terms of the monthlies, I don't like when I handwrite my monthly spread like this. I think it's just a little bit sloppy for my liking. I much preferred when I actually had these calendar stickers made. I just made them in my own sticker cutter. I do have a silhouette, but you can also pre-purchase these stickers from Midori. I think Lloydstrom has some. So there's a way around my dislike of my own handwriting when it comes to these individual monthly calendars. So I really liked this year when I actually printed out the stickers. It looked really nice and not as hand-drawn. Then in terms of using weekly spreads where I can use stickers, every single book that I have has some examples of ways that I use stickers in a weekly spread. This is a weekly spread where I use stickers. Here I also use stickers and it was a completely different setup. I also have used a weekly spread with individual hours written out, and then I've used this to track my time just like I would in a Hobonichi. And finally, in terms of using notebooks as an actual notebook, not having a day on 1 page, I have, again, so many examples over the years of times where I just use the notebook more like a conventional bullet journal setup where I would just start up a new section with the individual dates and then I would use this as a running to-do list. I have also set things up so that I had a week on one side and then I had my to-dos on another side. I've had a day just take up 2 lines. I've had a day take up 2 pages. It just seems like I had the answer in front of me all along. And if I'm thinking about the very last criterion that I had, I want either grids or dots that are at least 5 millimeters in width. That's something that is pretty easy to find in any of these notebooks. I have some Lloydstroms, I have some Rhodias here. In none of these notebooks did I have an issue finding a particular grid size or dot grid size that was comfortable for my handwriting. In fact, for the last few weeks of 2025, I've been using this Good Inkpressions Tomoe River paper notebook, and it is glorious. It feels really nice. It handles my mild liners and my fountain pens beautifully. It has a large enough grid space, and it also has little indicators that split it up into 4 sections across and several sections down. I think it's 6 sections down. The one thing that this is missing that I didn't have in my criterion originally was it is not numbered. That is something that I prefer. But overall, I don't have the same issues with my notebooks. All of these are fully completed from cover to cover, whereas none of these are. And some of these actually are just 1/2 of a pair, because I have bought a Hobonichi Cousin or a Hobonichi Cousin Avec every year since 2017, but these are the only books that I have left. I actually have one more that I have in another location just because it looks pretty and I have it like a display item. All of that brings me back to this part of my journal ecosystem for 2026. I've decided that I'm not going to fight against it, and I'm just going to take my losses with this Hobonichi that I've written on maybe 4 pages so far. After all that discussion and analysis, I'm down to these 2 notebooks to serve as my primary planner / journal for 2026. I don't want to make the same mistake again, so I am just going to open both of them to make sure that they have all of my needs, and then we can move from there. This guy I bought at Barnes & Noble. It was $30 US. All right, let's take a look at it. These days, I do prefer grid to dot, and I'm also trying to make sure that I use up all of my empty notebooks that I have hanging around. So I know this is going to be a dot grid. I already knew that the dot grid was a little darker than what I've become used to. All of the pages are numbered. The squares are large enough to support my handwriting. There is a table of contents at the very beginning. I've actually never had a soft cover Rhodia before, but I have had a goal book before. There is a yearly overview here and a second yearly overview, which is 6 months on 2 pages, and then that starts the notebook. So I want several yearly overviews, but I can make some myself at the very beginning. I would like a monthly overview that actually looks more like a traditional calendar. I know that I want that to have stickers or some standardized format, and then weekly and daily I can just make on the go as I'm moving through the year. One of these notebooks, if I'm using it as my primary planner system, usually lasts me about 6 months. Ever since moving into a hybrid system where I have a paper planner as well as my Notion life operating system, I might be able to get through the entire year with one notebook. So we'll see how that goes. Let's open up the bullet journal just to make sure that this is actually the best fit. I purchased this Lloydstrom bullet journal version at a local stationery store, Jenny Bick Design. If you're in the DC area, I love them. It was $28. This one has a navy blue cover. I love navy blue and copper. Those were actually part of my wedding colors. So I have that. It has a grid guide here at the beginning. This is also my second bullet journal branded Lloydstrom, so I do know what to expect here. This is the second edition. I believe my pink one was also a second edition. There's a place for your key, there's a place for intentions. I do notice that the paper is different. This has a very smooth writing surface, so I wonder if that was an upgrade as well. There is the index. I do see that this one also has indicators here for separating this page into 3 columns or 2 columns across the top, as well as if you're going from top to bottom. There are 4 pages for the index. There's places for a future log. So here we have 6 months on 2 pages, and we have 2 pages for a future log. So that is pretty similar. Then it goes right into page 12, and there's nothing else that follows. So there's actually a little less structure in the bullet journal. I am gravitating toward this mostly because of the sensation of the paper. If you are a paper person, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's just a feel that you prefer. The Rhodia has generally been also a very smooth paper and a smooth writing experience for me. It might just come down to what fits better into this cover, since this is the cover that I'll be using this year. So let me give that a try and see. My Chikawa stickers will be coming with me one way or another. Interesting, the Rhodia is a little loose in here. Side note, when my son, who is also a book lover, sees me manhandling my notebooks or my books when I'm opening them and writing in the margins, he is visibly offended. There's audible gasps sometimes. All right, this fits really nicely in this. So there's not a lot of shaking going on, and it feels similar to how the Hobonichi felt. Interestingly, I think this might be a tad thinner than the Hobonichi because the Hobonichi was kind of stretching this out a bit. So I think the bullet journal might have won out this time. With that decided, this is my complete journal ecosystem. I have this little guy for on the go and random notes. I have this A5 for my Japanese language learning, and I have this Lloydstrom 1917 bullet journal edition for my everyday planner. If you're interested in seeing how I set up this everyday planner, please give this video a thumbs up and let me know what spreads you'd like to see me set up in this guide for 2026. And if you're wondering to yourself, why in the world would anyone be using a paper planner in 2026, especially someone that has a pretty robust digital system on Notion? I'm doing a video on that next week. Once that is posted, you can find that right here. And if you're more of a digital planning person, check out this playlist where I walk through my entire Notion setup.